Once, the essence of femininity was a force both subtle and formidable, not because it sought to mimic the strength of men, but because it embodied a power of its own, an influence capable of bending the will without breaking it. Traditional femininity thrived in its contrast to masculinity, creating a polarity that allowed love to grow in the fertile soil of mutual need and complementary traits. A woman's grace, modesty, loyalty, and nurturing presence were not signs of submission, but strategic virtues that inspired a man's protection, devotion, and willingness to sacrifice. It was a dynamic in which both roles were clear, and in clarity, there was stability. The modern age has dismantled these structures with surgical precision, not by accident, but as a consequence of shifting power balances, ideological campaigns, and the allure of individualism. In this transformation, femininity has been reframed not as a complementary strength, but as a relic of oppression, something to be abandoned in favor of traits traditionally ascribed to men: assertiveness, ambition, dominance. These qualities, while valuable in certain spheres, do not nurture the conditions in which deep and lasting romantic love once thrived. When two forces mirror each other too closely, attraction wanes, for nature thrives on opposites that complete rather than compete. The new model encourages women to see traditional feminine virtues as weaknesses. Patience becomes passivity, loyalty becomes dependence, modesty becomes repression. The outcome is a generation of women who have been taught to trade soft power for hard power, unaware that in doing so they have forfeited the very qualities that once bound a man's heart to theirs. The man no longer feels the call to protect, for she no longer invites protection. The man no longer yearns to provide, for she insists she needs nothing from him. And yet, in the absence of this dance of giving and receiving, love becomes a hollow performance, a contract between two self-sufficient individuals rather than an interdependent bond. This death of femininity is not merely a shift in behavior, but a shift in mindset. In the past, a woman's value was not measured by how much she could replicate a man's role, but by how skillfully she could embody her own. She understood the art of influence, the subtle diplomacy of affection, the unspoken power of restraint. Now, the pursuit of equality has been interpreted not as the elevation of both genders in their unique strengths, but as the elimination of difference altogether. What is lost in this sameness is not merely romantic tension, but the psychological foundation that allowed men and women to inspire the best in one another. The modern woman, raised in this ideology, often does not even realize the transformation she has undergone. She is told she is more, or powered, than her grandmother, yet she is more alone, more distrustful of men, and less desired in the way that stirs lifelong devotion. She is admired for her achievements, perhaps envied for her independence, but she is not adored in the same manner as the women of old, because adoration is born from qualities she has been taught to abandon. For men, this shift creates a dilemma. The desire to love is not extinguished, but the object of that love has changed beyond recognition. To give himself fully to a woman who resists the very structure of complementarity is to love in a vacuum, offering provision, protection, and devotion where they are neither required nor reciprocated. This is not a cry for regression, but a recognition that when the traits that once made femininity magnetic are discarded, the romance they inspired dies with them. And so, modern relationships often lack the very current that once made them electric. Passion fades into companionship, companionship decays into negotiation, and negotiation often ends in detachment. The man may still seek beauty, but beauty alone does not sustain love. Without the softness, the grace, the humility, and the devotion that once amplified that beauty, it becomes an empty shell, admired for a time, but incapable of holding the soul of a man for a lifetime in the world that once was. Love thrived on mutual sacrifice. It was not an agreement calculated in the cold language of gain and loss, but a bond in which each gave what they could without keeping score. The union between man and woman was grounded in shared purpose, often tied to family, survival, and the belief in something greater than personal comfort. That foundation created a form of loyalty immune to the passing storms of circumstance, because it was anchored in principle rather than in constant evaluation of profit. Modern love has replaced this foundation with a marketplace logic. Relationships are now assessed much like business deals. What is the return on investment? What is the level of personal benefit? What losses must be tolerated for the perceived gain? Emotional connection is no longer a sacred end in itself. It has become a means to a personal end. The very language of dating and marriage has shifted toward terms of economics and convenience. And in this transformation, love has lost its innocence and its permanence. The modern woman, shaped by a world that elevates self-interest as the highest good, is taught from an early age to see relationships through a lens of utility. She may not speak of it openly, yet her attraction often leans toward the man who offers the greatest package of resources, status, and future security. These resources are not always material. They may be influence, emotional labor, or social prestige, but they are still measured as assets. If these assets diminish, so too can the affection that once seemed unconditional. This dynamic mirrors a merchant's loyalty to a supplier. So long as the goods are of high quality and delivered on time, the partnership stands. When the supply falters, the search for a new provider begins. This is not to say that men are free from this transactional mindset. The modern man, faced with rising costs in both financial and emotional investment, calculates his willingness to commit with the same rationality a trader applies to a contract. He considers whether the woman offers enough in return: beauty, companionship, sexual availability, or alignment with his life goals. The emotional poetry of love becomes obscured by an unspoken spreadsheet in which benefits are weighed against liabilities. What was once the giving of oneself without measure becomes the giving of only what will be matched or exceeded in return. Machiavelli would recognize this shift as the inevitable consequence of a society that prizes individual advantage above collective duty. Where power is the highest currency, even love bends to its rules. A relationship, stripped of its illusions, becomes a negotiation between two parties seeking to maximize their own position. Passion, in this environment, burns quickly and dies abruptly, for it was never nurtured by deep-rooted loyalty, but by the temporary satisfaction of mutual benefit. The danger of transactional love is that it breeds instability. If the relationship exists only so long as both parties profit, then any downturn, loss of income, decline in appearance, fading novelty, becomes a threat to its survival. True sacrifice becomes rare, for to give without expectation is to break the very logic on which the relationship was founded. In a marketplace of love, the highest bidder always stands a chance to replace the current partner, and the knowledge of this fact gnaws at the security of both. For the man seeking something beyond mere convenience, this reality is disillusioning. He is confronted with the fact that his worth in love is often tied not to his character or his devotion, but to his ability to continually produce value that meets or exceeds a shifting standard. He is not loved for himself alone, but for the benefits his presence brings. And if those benefits are withdrawn or outmatched, he becomes replaceable. The tragedy of this arrangement is that it strips love of its most transformative quality, the power to bind two people beyond the ebb and flow of fortune. Instead, it creates a fragile alliance in which affection is conditional, devotion is temporary, and trust is always shadowed by calculation. Love, in its pure form, cannot survive when both hearts are accountants, measuring each gesture against the scale of personal gain. It is here, in this cold arithmetic, that modern passion withers before it can root itself deeply enough to endure. There was a time when the human heart understood that love demanded the surrender of a part of oneself. To bind with another meant to soften one's ego, to allow devotion to flow toward another person, even when it required sacrifice. In that older world, humility was a virtue, and the capacity to prioritize someone else's well-being above one's own was seen as a mark of nobility. This humility made love possible, for only when two people were willing to bend could they form a bond unshaken by time. Modern culture has replaced this humility with an altar to the self. From childhood, people, especially women, are told to center themselves above all else, to see self-love not as a healthy foundation but as the ultimate goal. This ideology does not merely encourage self-respect, It cultivates an obsession with one's own image, desires, and comfort. In this creed of self-worship, every relationship must serve the individual's personal growth and happiness, or else it is deemed disposable. The moment a bond challenges the ego, it is seen not as a test of love's endurance, but as a threat to self-fulfillment. This mindset reshapes the very definition of love. Love becomes less about giving and more about receiving. Acts of affection are measured by how much they affirm the self, rather than by the joy of giving without expectation. Any demand for compromise is interpreted as oppression. Any request for loyalty as a limitation on personal freedom. Under this philosophy, devotion to another is dangerous because it risks placing someone else at the center of one's life, a position now reserved for the self alone. In the modern woman, the cult of self-worship often manifests in the language of empowerment. She is told to never settle, to keep her standards high, to refuse anything that does not make her feel constantly fulfilled. While there is wisdom in avoiding harmful partnerships, this pursuit of perpetual satisfaction leaves no room for the inevitable imperfections of love. Relationships, being unions of flawed beings, require patience and endurance through moments of discontent. But when self-worship reigns supreme, discontent is treated as a signal to leave, not as an opportunity to grow closer through adversity. This form of thinking also distorts attraction itself. Instead of seeking a partner to share life's burdens and victories, the self-obsessed individual seeks a mirror, someone who reflects their self-image back to them in flattering ways. The partner becomes less a person to be loved and more a stage prop in the performance of one's personal narrative. When their role in this performance no longer enhances the script, they are written out without remorse. Machiavelli would see this as a predictable outcome of a society that prizes power and autonomy above interdependence. The self-worshipper cannot love in the truest sense, because love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability means relinquishing a measure of control. By refusing to be dependent on anyone, they also strip themselves of the depth of connection that dependence can create. In this way, they gain the illusion of freedom, but lose the reality of intimacy. The cult of self-worship also poisons the perception of sacrifice. In older times, sacrifice was not seen as weakness, but as proof of love's authenticity. Today, to sacrifice is to betray oneself. Every act of compromise is scrutinized through the lens of self-preservation, and every moment of giving is weighed against the fear of not receiving equally in return. Such constant calculation robs love of its generosity, leaving only an exchange of mutual convenience. In the end, self-worship isolates. The one who lives for themselves alone may avoid the pain of being hurt, but they also avoid the beauty of being truly known. Their relationships, though they may be numerous, remain shallow because they cannot allow the kind of emotional surrender that would bind two souls in genuine trust. And so, they drift from partner to partner, always seeking the next source of affirmation, never realizing that the very thing they fear, the loss of self in love, is the same thing that once gave love its power to endure. There was an era when masculinity was not something a man had to justify, explain, or defend. It was an unspoken expectation shaped by duty, sacrifice, and the willingness to bear burdens that others could not. Men were measured not by how agreeable they were, but by their ability to protect, to lead, and to stand firm against the chaos of life. In return, this strength was respected and desired, for it complemented the feminine, creating a balance that anchored relationships and families. The modern world has dismantled this balance piece by piece. Masculinity has been redefined, not as a virtue or a natural force, but as a threat to be restrained, softened, or replaced. The very traits that once made a man valuable, decisiveness, resilience, authority, are recast as symptoms of arrogance, oppression, or outdated thinking. In the name of progress, men are told to disarm themselves of their instincts, to trade command for compliance, to replace their natural assertiveness with perpetual sensitivity. This transformation is not accidental. It is the inevitable result of a cultural shift that elevates individual autonomy over complementary interdependence. The more society insists that men and women are not merely equal in worth but identical in role, the less space remains for the kind of masculinity that thrives on leadership and responsibility. What once made men distinctly desirable is now seen as a liability. And in stripping men of these qualities, society also strips women of the polarity that once made attraction powerful and enduring. For the modern man, this places him in a paradox. If he embodies traditional masculinity, firmness, confidence, authority, he risks being accused of dominance or toxicity. If he abandons these traits to adapt, he often finds himself stripped of respect, both from others and from the women he seeks to love. Women may publicly praise the sensitive, understanding man, but privately, their desire is often still drawn to the man who stands strong, who does not bend under pressure. This contradiction leaves men walking a tightrope between social acceptance and romantic magnetism. Masculinity under siege does not only affect relationships, it corrodes the man's sense of self. To be told that his natural impulses to protect, provide, and lead are outdated is to rob him of purpose. Purpose has always been the fuel of masculinity. Without it, a man becomes aimless, detached, and increasingly disinterested in forming lasting commitments. When men no longer believe that their strength is wanted or needed, they retreat from the very arenas. Family, marriage, fatherhood, where that strength was once proven. Machiavelli would observe that power never disappears, it merely changes hands. As men are encouraged to relinquish the authority once tied to their role, that authority is redistributed. The modern relationship becomes less a partnership of complementary forces and more a negotiation between equals competing for the same ground. But in competition, intimacy suffers. Two leaders in the same space, both unwilling to yield, turn passion into a struggle for dominance. The dance of pursuit and surrender, which once bound lovers together, is replaced by a constant battle over who will set the terms. This erosion of masculinity also has a silent but devastating effect on attraction itself. True romantic passion is not born from sameness, but from difference. When the man is stripped of his distinctly masculine energy, and the woman of her distinctly feminine energy, they may coexist as companions, but the current that once charged their connection fades. The relationship becomes functional but not magnetic, polite but not thrilling. In this climate, many men choose withdrawal over adaptation. They see commitment as a risk without reward, knowing that the role they are expected to play offers neither the respect nor the gratitude it once did. Some retreat into isolation, others into temporary pleasures that demand no long-term investment. And each time a man abandons the pursuit of building something lasting, the cycle strengthens. Fewer men willing to lead, fewer women able to trust, fewer unions capable of enduring beyond the shallow terms of modern romance. The modern man lives in an age of images, and nowhere is this more dangerous than in matters of the heart. Love no longer begins in the quiet observation of character, but in the curated glare of presentation. The image of the ideal woman is crafted not by life's demands, but by media's inventions, filters, slogans, and staged glimpses into a life that may not exist beyond the frame. This image is seductive, not because it reflects reality, but because it flatters desire, showing men what they wish to believe rather than what truly is. Reality, however, does not bend to fantasy for long. The woman who appears endlessly charming in public may be restless in private. The one who projects sweetness in photographs may wield cold calculation in daily life. In the age of illusion, authenticity is often a liability, for truth cannot compete with the polished spectacle of performance. Men are drawn into these illusions willingly, not because they are deceived entirely, but because they prefer the comfort of hope over the discomfort of seeing clearly. To acknowledge reality means confronting the uncomfortable fact that the traits most celebrated today are often incompatible with enduring love. The machinery of modern culture thrives on sustaining these illusions. Advertising glorifies independence while quietly implying dependence on consumption. Social media encourages constant exhibition, rewarding vanity with validation and mistaking attention for affection. These forces shape both perception and behavior. Women learn to cultivate an image that appeals not to the deep instincts of a lasting partner, but to the shallow impulses of admiration and envy. Men, in turn, pursue these images as though securing them will secure the qualities they imagine lie beneath. Yet reality makes itself known in the quiet spaces between performance. It is in the moments when no audience is watching that truth emerges, whether the woman who speaks of loyalty can endure hardship without fleeing, whether the one who praises honesty can face it without resentment, whether the one who claims to seek love can truly put another's needs before her own. Too often, the answer is no, for the image was never built to carry the weight of reality. It was built to attract, not to sustain. Machiavelli understood that power rests in perception, but he also understood that perception without substance collapses under pressure. The illusion of the ideal woman may win a man's attention, but reality determines whether she keeps it. And in an age where illusions are easier to maintain than ever before, the confrontation with reality tends to happen late, often after commitment has been made. When the cost of retreat is high, the man discovers that he has married not a person, but an image, and that the two are far from the same. This gap between illusion and reality poisons trust. When a man realizes that what he believed was love was merely attraction to a performance, his willingness to invest in future relationships diminishes. He becomes suspicious, guarded, always watching for the cracks in the mask. Women, sensing this suspicion, retreat further into the safety of image making, reinforcing the cycle. The more the illusion is polished, the more reality is concealed, and the more men are forced to navigate a world where truth is rare and costly. The tragedy is that both men and women lose in this arrangement. The man is denied the security of knowing that the woman beside him is as she appears. The woman, by investing in illusion, forfeits the kind of devotion that comes from being truly known and accepted. The relationship that forms between them is not a union of souls, but a contract between two public personas, each striving to maintain an image that satisfies the other's fantasy while concealing their own human flaws. In this way, modern love often fails before it has begun, for it is not built upon the recognition of reality, but upon the mutual maintenance of illusions. And when reality finally intrudes, as it always does, it does not merely end the romance, it exposes the fact that the romance never truly existed in the first place.